So I've been taking 3D photographs for about 4 years now, and I've come across a lot of problems, and it's been a lot of trial and error to figure out what works and what doesn't work.
I see what the devil see. Right Evis with jeans, miss with Tom Ford, hopping in Celine, drive with a door to the fiend, bitch treat me like Kane, been hairdressed since a teen.
Today I just wanted to go over a few things that'll help improve your 3D photographs and kind of give you a better sense of how to shoot and plan to shoot your photographs. 3D photographs are interesting because they're not quite video, but they're not quite photos as well. And so these 3D GIFs can help portray images or scenes or people and tell stories in a different light than your typical video or photo can. So today I just wanted to go over a few quick tips on things that'll help you not only plan your shots, but also edit and also compose your images as you're thinking about how to tell your story. The majority of the shots that I create, both commercially and for friends, I post on my Instagram. Go ahead and check it out. It's at Gakuyen. And also go ahead and click subscribe and help me out on this channel as I post more videos. All right, so jumping right into it, the first thing that people often ask me are what cameras do you use and what settings do you use? And the first tutorial I posted was actually shot on my iPhone. And so in all seriousness, you don't really need a fancy camera or any sort of film camera for that matter. What I do is I usually use my DSLR or iPhone and I mimic the style that the Nishika uses by taking offset photos, incrementally offset photos, to recreate the 3D effect. By taking these offset photos, you can recreate the stereoscopic effect in Photoshop in post. The first tip is actually what settings do you use on your camera? And so what I often do is if I'm using my iPhone, first of all, I'll go ahead and turn off live mode and I'll go ahead and put on the regular camera setting. So that way when I take photos, I don't have to go through and change the .heic file. I found that when you change the camera setting to just regular photos, it's easier to control. Also, when you use your DSLR, I set it to continuous or burst mode and actually set on the low continuous burst mode. I found that if you use the high continuous burst mode, it's often too fast and the increments between shots are too slim. You don't get quite as deep of an effect for the 3D to work. So actually use low continuous burst mode. The second tip I wanted to get into is how do you shoot the 3D photos and keep it super smooth? And it's all in the increments between each shot. The biggest problem that I see a lot with 3Ds that are kind of shaky is that the increments between each shot are either not consistent or they're too wide. People often think that when you take a 3D photo, you want to jump super wide and that'll increase the depth effect. And while this may be true if you have a wide enough scene, what I've found the easiest thing to do is to keep in mind that you want to keep your shots very incremental and very slightly offset between each shot. I use the kind of the pinky rule, which is essentially the knuckle of your pinky is almost an inch. I try to keep each shot an inch or just under an inch offset. And so it's very, very minute, and you may think it might not work, but the less amount of jump between each shot, it'll give you a more smooth effect. The third tip I want to talk about is actually composing your 3D shots. And so 3D obviously means 3 dimensions. So obviously 3 dimensions, typically all you have to think about is obviously your length, width, length, the 2 dimensions. But when you shoot 3D photos, you have to think about the 3rd dimension, which is depth. Oftentimes I've found that it's easier to shoot subjects, whether that be people, cars, inanimate objects. When you're trying to highlight something in your shots, you want to go ahead and compose that image with the foreground, the subject, a considerable distance away from your background in order to illuminate the depth between both subjects. So an example of this is when you take portraits of somebody in the street. What I try to do is try not to have them stand against a wall, a plain background, or something that is very continuous, and that will not allow too much depth in your shots. One way to easily counteract this is to have them standing either in the center of a long street that goes all the way down. When you have a subject and the background has lines going to a vanishing point, that gives you a great sense of depth in your final image. You may think, well, this is basic photography 101. Well, it is, but it's really interesting to kind of compose your images with that depth in mind. Another thing that I like to do is I like to put objects in the foreground. What's a good example of this? Okay, so for instance, in this image, I position myself right by these, they're called gacha machines in Japan, but they're essentially toy machines. And so I position myself right on top to where I'm also almost blocking the subject with the toy machine in the foreground. So when you're finally layering your final effect, it gives you an extra layer of depth. A helpful tip that I always think about when I shoot my 3D photos are you want to initially show your setting before you show your subject. What that means is I often try to shoot the subject further away from your camera, and then with each subsequent 3D, get closer to your subject. I'll often take 3 or 4 in a sequence, and I'll shoot one further away. I'll get obviously a wide shot, I'll get a medium shot, and then I'll get a portrait or a very close shot that highlights either the person or the image or car or item that I'm trying to highlight. It's fun also to loop this. You can either loop it continuously or you can actually loop it back, so it's almost like a longer boomerang. The final tip when putting together your final 3D story is to add an element of music or audio. What I like to do is I often like to match the music that goes with the 3D story to the setting or the mood that I'm trying to convey with the 3D series.
I'm already chilling. I'm alright, shit. I'm alright, cocaine right now. But who got the rent off? Cause it's been a whole year since young nigga shot my pouch. What? Been a whole year and I still don't know who to pop my pouch.
I'm a big fan of lo-fi hip-hop, so I use that a lot. Alternatively, I use sometimes just acoustic or kind of cheery vibes for my photos. Obviously, you can use any sort of music that you feel fits your scene. What I like to do, however, is I like to match the transitions with the beat or the BPM or the hi-hats of a song. In doing so, even though it's such a subtle detail, it adds a lot to your final image. If you have any tips or questions that you want to share, go ahead and leave them in the comments below and I'll try to respond to everybody. 3D photos are that great in-between between videos and photos, and it can highlight something very well and very uniquely. So yeah, tag me in your creations and I'd love to see them, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy New Year's and see you in 2021.